Welcome back, everyone. I'm Yossi Goslin, NBA salary cap expert, and in this video, I'm going to talk about the Houston Rockets, who I'm really excited to talk about. I think they are extremely well set up to make a big addition in the near future. They just moved up in the lottery, so they have the third overall pick, and they have an additional 4 first-round picks that they can offer in the trade, and several other young players that other teams will covet. So they can be really aggressive in the trade market this summer for an all-star level player. So I want to talk about some of the players they've been linked to recently, how they can get a guy like Donovan Mitchell or Mikal Bridges. And if they don't get a guy like either of them, they also have the possibility of having max cap space in the following summer. So I'm going to get into all that. And before I do, if you're new to the channel or you've been here already, please like and subscribe. It's still a very new channel and it will help with its growth a lot. So let's take a look at the Rockets payroll and see what their situation is like heading into the offseason. So last summer, they had cap space, which they used to sign Fred VanVleet and Dillon Brooks to large deals. And this year, they are going to be over the cap. They could have cap space if they waive some of their non-guaranteed players, but that's not going to happen, which means as an over the cap team, they are going to have the non-taxpayer mid-level exception as their highest form of spending power. Starts at just under 13 million, and they have the flexibility to use it. They are projected to be about 14 million below the $171.3 million luxury tax line, which they're not going to exceed. They won't want to exceed it this year, but I think they're going to prioritize that flexibility in the trade market. And the players to take a look at include Jeff Green and Jack Londale. They were signed to contracts last offseason that were basically designed to be traded. They were only guaranteed last season, so they could have traded these guys, and the teams taking them in could have just cut them and not have any obligation in future seasons. Now, if they're going to trade him now, they're probably going to have a significant guarantee or even the salaries this year fully guaranteed to make the trades work. But then for Jeff Green, he's not under contract after this season, and Jock Landale, they could just cut him and they'll be off the hook after that. So their salaries, along with a player like Jalen Green, who has been mentioned in trade rumors during the trade deadline, that's about $30 million that they could combine and trade for just about any of their targets. And they'll probably look to add some of their first round picks in a package, including the third overall pick. Now, that pick is projected to make $10 million this upcoming season. However, it can't be used towards salary matching in a trade until 30 days after it's signed. So likely the earliest would be August 1st. And they can add up to 4 more additional first round picks if they wanted to make the most maximal first round pick package possible, which includes picks in 2025, 27, 29, 2031, and they could put pick swaps in between. Now, I'm sure the Rockets are probably going to try to make their trade package based on picks, but I don't think it's going to be that simple because in this era of parity, a lot of teams now want established veterans or young players that have shown that they're going to be a good player in the league. But the Rockets may have a too many good young player problem. They have a lot of really good young talent on the roster, and I'm sure that a lot of the teams they're talking to, they're gonna require like a guy like Jabari Smith or Amin Thompson, which I don't think the Rockets want to part with, and even to a lesser extent, Tari Eason, Cam Whitmore. And I'm sure that when it comes to actually making these offers, they're probably going to have to include one or more of these guys. But for simplicity's sake, when I go through these scenarios and what a trade could look like, I'm going to put the least amount of players possible, just show what is the minimum needed to make a trade work. And before I get into projections and what those scenarios could look like, I need to talk about some extension candidates, starting with Alperen Sengun, who had a major breakout year last season and in my opinion, should have been an all-star, and he's now a top 10 center. So I don't know if he's going to get a max contract, but this is the most he can get with Houston, and I think there's a pretty good chance that he gets it or something pretty close to it. Now, there is an advantage for the Rockets to not extend him now, and that is so they could potentially have max cap space in 2025 in the next offseason. The Sixers recently did this with Tyrese Maxey. They held off from him having an extension last offseason, and now they're about to have a lot of cap space now. And then they're going to reward him with a max contract this summer. So there's a way that the Rockets can have around 60 million in cap space next summer if they let Sengun hit for restricted free agency and then re-sign him after they use all their cap space. So this could make them a really credible threat to outright sign a top free agent like Donovan Mitchell, for example, if he were to become available and is interested in going there. So they'd only do this if they feel like they have a legitimate shot at a player like him. But if they can make that trade early on in this upcoming offseason, then they might as well extend Sengun as soon as they can. Jalen Green is also extension eligible for the Rockets, and he really came along late last year after Sengun got injured. He had the best play of his career, and it helped keep the Rockets in the play-in tournament picture. But is that stretch enough to get a max contract? I don't think so. As of now, I wouldn't think he gets quite that much. And if he does command one, then I could see negotiations getting pushed to closer to the deadline before the start of the season. So this is something I could see him getting if he does extend. Roughly $35 million a year. I could see it as in the higher end of his extension outcomes. It would have him making more than guys like Tyler Hero and Devin Vassell are earning, and then less than Desmond Bane. Now, I do wonder if the Rockets do consider holding off on an extension, even if they can get him at a rate that they like. And that's for trade purposes as far as this season goes, because once they extend him, there's going to be some complications towards trading him mid-season. Depending on whether they give him an extension or not, we could get an idea pretty soon how the Rockets view him in their long-term picture. So let's aim high and say that Donovan Mitchell wants out from Cleveland and he's interested in going to Houston. So the Rockets are already reportedly interested in pursuing him. There was a report by The Athletic that they would really like to get him if possible, and they have more than enough assets to get him, to get a deal done. And like I mentioned earlier, I'm just going to make things simple. I'm not going to include other young players that in these trade scenarios because there's just so many guys and there's so many permutations of how these trades could end up looking like. So I just want to talk about what is the least amount of money they can send out along with draft picks, because again, I think the Rockets are ideally going to want to try to make a draft picks based package. So they include the third overall pick, multiple first round picks in the future, and whatever swaps they can offer. And they send out Jalen Green, Jeff Green, Jock Landale. Altogether, that's $30 million they're sending out. They only need to get within $7.77 million of Donovan Mitchell's $35.4 million to acquire him, and so this trade would work. So I plugged in Donovan Mitchell for Jalen Green, Jeff Green, Jock Landale, and the third overall pick, and they have a pretty strong roster, a pretty deep starting five, and they still have all their young players coming off the bench. So overall, just extremely simple for Houston to make the money work for a player making as much as Mitchell. And here I have them using the non-taxpayer mid-level exception because they still have enough flexibility to use it while staying under the tax and filling out the roster. They also could use it as a trade exception into the season. If they can't sign anyone that they want with it, they could now acquire players within it like a normal trade exception. It's a new addition to the CBA starting this year. But I want to get into Houston's cap space situation the following season and how Alperen Sengun would factor into it, because they could easily generate the maximum cap space needed to sign an all-star like Donovan Mitchell while being able to re-sign Sengun after. So let's say the Rockets make it through the end of the season and they didn't make any major trade. In fact, they just keep the same roster for the most part, including the third overall pick. They still have all their picks. So if they were to decline Fred VanVleet's $44.9 million trade team option for next season, and they cut Jock Landale, and they were announced all their free agent cap holds except for Alperen Sengun, who's got that $16.3 million cap hold, they could generate over $60 million in cap space. So Sengun has that cap hold, which would interfere with Houston's cap space projection. And basically what they'll be able to do is spend that $60 million or so, get back to the cap, get up to the salary cap, and then they could re-sign him up to the max. Now, I doubt that they'd be able to sign a player like Donovan Mitchell outright in free agency, just because that's just not how the league really works anymore. Ever since the 2019 offseason, teams are going to preemptively make a trade if they have the feeling that the player is going to leave. But just the threat of having this option to go out and sign just about anybody they want could push a trade if an all-star expressed an interest in going to Houston. Let's go back and do smaller scale trade. Mikal Bridges, a player that the Rockets reportedly have had interest in and have been in discussions with the Nets. They supposedly offer Jalen Green and some of the Nets picks that they own from the James Harden trade, but the Nets decline. But let's just say that the Nets get a feeling that there is no all-star coming in the near future. They're not going to be able to turn this around anytime soon, and they decide to pivot to a rebuild and regain some control of the draft picks that the Rockets own from them, which includes the number 3 overall pick this year. They have one more first in 2026 and 2 swaps in 2025 and 2027. So the picks aside, the salary matching component is even simpler than a Donovan Mitchell trade. They only need to get to $15.5 million to match for Bridges' $23.3 million. So At the minimum, Jalen Green, Jock Landale, that works. So I plugged in Mikal Bridges for the players I have being sent out in the trade, and still a very deep team. They could still use the mid-level exception if they want, but better yet, they could use that flexibility for another consolidation trade. They still have some more expiring contracts like Jeff Green and Jayshawn Tate and Steven Adams that they could do to be even more aggressive if they'd like. And the great thing about having Mikal Bridges is that he's owed about $50 million over the next 2 years. So they could still potentially have some cap flexibility in the future to pursue somebody else. And let me show you how. So here's Rockets cap situation for next off season, but I plugged in Mikal Bridges, and with his team-friendly salary, they'd still be in a position to generate over $50 million in cap space, and that's more than enough to sign an all-star level like Donovan Mitchell to his maximum starting amount. Now, again, I'm going to reiterate, like I mentioned earlier, that if an all-star caliber player like Mitchell or Mikal Bridges does become available, there's a very strong chance that the Rockets are going to have to part with some of their young players because that's just what other teams are going to want. But that's not the end of the world, because let's just say that the Rockets, they don't want to trade any of their young players. They want to keep every single guy they ever drafted. They believe in every single one, and they want to roster all of them in the future. It's not possible for them to pay every single one of these guys. They can't pay every single one of Alperen Sengun, Jalen Green, Jabari Smith, Tari Eason, Amin Thompson, whoever they're going to draft with the number 3 overall pick if they keep it. It's just not possible. All these players are going to make a lot of money in the near future. And this is what I meant by that the Rockets have a good young player problem, and they're going to have to consolidate some of these guys and start choosing who they want to keep, because realistically in this new NBA with all the new CBA changes, you could only really pay 4 to 5 guys, like really pay those guys. But this is a great problem to have. And thankfully, they have a couple of years before they need to start making tough decisions before things start really getting expensive. And because they have all these valuable players, all these draft picks, and in my opinion, all these realistic opportunities to add all star level players to the mix, I'm very optimistic that they're going to be able to build a legitimate contender in the near future.